Okay, I was part of a group of 19 passengers and a trip leader who were traveling through Yemen on a 2-week tour, traveling by four-wheel drive vehicles. We were in 5 different vehicles that traveled together. And on Monday, the 28th of December at 11 in the morning, as we were driving in a fairly remote area, we were basically ambushed by somewhere between or around 15 or so armed men who took control of the vehicles, hijacked them essentially, and then drove us off the main road on a dirt track to maybe about 10 kilometres into what was a very barren desert and mountainous area. And from there, they took us out of the jeeps and took our passports and asked about our nationalities. They seemed to have a special interest in identifying Americans. They then walked us about an hour's walk across, up and over quite a steep ridge and into a ravine where we were kept with guards, some of the terrorists guarding us, until about 9 o'clock that night. Then they had us move again back to the area where the jeeps had been left, and that was a much more open space, and they gave us our sleeping bags and allowed us access to our luggage to get things we might need. They seemed very concerned that people would get medicines that they might need. We slept, just out on the desert over that night, and at all times there was one of the terrorists walking up and down along our row of sleeping bags, shining a flashlight occasionally at our faces, but making sure everybody was still there. About at daybreak the next morning, they then walked us again to a different ravine in a different direction, and not so far, about 30 minutes walk. And we stayed there. They seemed a bit more relaxed then. They let us spread out more in this ravine. We could sit sort of wherever we wanted in the shade. And about 10 minutes to 11 was when we first started hearing gunfire in the distance. And that was really what became the beginning of the really most difficult part of the whole experience, because what developed from that was basically a gun battle between the terrorists and the Yemen government soldiers. At the sound after the gunfire had been going on for a few minutes, and our captors, the terrorists, had realized something serious was starting to happen, they rounded us up and took us back down the ravine. And at that point, the 16 of us were split into 2 separate groups, a group of 5 that went ahead, and 11 of us in the second group who were told to wait, and we waited there about 20 minutes, and we never saw the other 5 people again until the survivors of that group were reunited with us at the hotel at Aden the next morning. The 11 of us who were still together, they took us back to the area where the jeeps were, and near there was a wide open space about the size of 3 football fields, and it was divided into 3 by low dirt walls about 3 foot high, sort of barricades or embankments. And after a little bit of confusion moving us around different areas, they didn't seem to know quite what to do with us at first. Then they forced us at gunpoint to stand up on the first of these barricades, and they were hiding behind us or sheltering behind the barricade, with us standing on top with our arms in the air. And so basically we were between them and the incoming gunfire from the soldiers. And we got the sense over time that we started hearing gunfire from all directions. We had the sense that, and we were assuming, we didn't know, but we were assuming it was soldiers, that they were gradually encircling the area that we were located in. Then the terrorists, again at gunpoint, forced us to move into the open space in front of this low barricade, and for 45 minutes we were standing there with bullets flying overhead, shells exploding around us. We were literally just sitting ducks in the middle of this crossfire between the soldiers. And there was the conversation around, the shouting going on was all in Arabic, so we could not understand what was being said. After those 45 minutes, where it was quite miraculous to us that we were all still standing, they brought us back to stand on the barricade again, arms in the air. And that's when it got even more incredible. One of the terrorists, who appeared to be the leader, he wore a very distinctive purple sarong or wraparound skirt. He grabbed one of the British men who happened to be standing at the right-hand end of the line, and held a pistol to the side of his head. At this stage, the nearest soldiers, we'd gradually been able to make out the soldiers in the distance coming towards us, and the nearest ones were now in shouting distance, so that this lead terrorist was shouting to them, holding his pistol at the head of this hostage. And we got the sense they were trying to negotiate something. You know, he was threatening to kill him, but we couldn't understand what was being said. He did not pull the trigger. He let the man go. Then he grabbed the next person in line who was standing next to me, an Australian woman, and jumped up on the barricade. He grabbed her by the hair. He had a Kalashnikov gun. He had it against her rib cage, and he was shouting, but he was using the word American, and she said under her breath, I heard her say, "I'm not an American, I'm Australian," and I remember saying to her, "I don't think he cares." And then he pushed her down the embankment onto the ground, open space in front of us, and he fired several shots around her, and she just huddled up into a sort of fetal position on the ground. And I think he maybe wanted the soldiers to believe he had shot her, but he hadn't. She was still alive. Then I was next in line, so I was not sure what was going to happen next. He grabbed me by the back of my neck, by the back of my shirt, pushed his rifle up against my spine and pushed me down the embankment. I thought to make me lie on the ground too, but no, he came after me, and he marched me out across this open space with the gun against my back. I could feel it right against my spine and holding my shirt. And we walked, you know, as a few hundred yards out, and then we got to the next barricade, and he pushed me up and over it again, staying right behind me the whole time. And I wasn't sure what he was trying to do. We were walking towards the soldiers, although, you know, the soldiers were down behind the third barricade. I couldn't actually see them at that stage. Then as we just got over the second barricade and had gone a few more yards into the second, like, football field-sized space, suddenly I felt the gun was no longer at my back, and I looked down and he had fallen on the ground. And I sort of was surprised by that, and then I heard him moan, and I realized he had been shot. So at that instant, since I was a little bit more than halfway from where the terrorists were and the hostages were, but halfway between them and where I thought the first soldiers were, I decided it was my best bet was to run towards the soldiers. But the terrorist was trying to get up, and his gun was lying on the ground next to him. So I was afraid that if I ran, he might be able to shoot me in the back as I was running, because he was just wounded. So I grabbed the barrel, grabbed his gun off the ground, and grabbed the barrel, expecting I could just pull it away, but he grabbed the other end, so we were sort of fighting over this gun for a little bit. And then, you know, I sort of kicked him in the face, and then I just simply put my foot down as hard as I could on his head and used that to get the extra strength and leverage and wrench the gun out of his hands, and then ran across the open space in front of me towards the soldiers with the gun. Sort of, it was quite a bizarre experience, I can tell you. And then as I was close to the third barricade, I suddenly was thinking, I don't know who's over the other side. I'm assuming it's soldiers, but it could be another terrorist organization that's fighting these ones. And if I come running at them with a gun, even though I have no clue how to fire it, this could be dangerous. So I threw the gun away at that point, and then just ran up and over the barricade and literally hit the dust, as they say, on the other side, lay down low behind the barricade, and I looked up and saw three soldiers within about 20 feet of me, and they motioned to me to stay down. I didn't need any encouragement to at that stage, but also a thumbs-up signal, which I returned. And I stayed there. Several soldiers who came up to me to see if I was okay, and then more and more soldiers went over the barricade towards where the hostages were. There was more gunfire for about 10 minutes. And then when the gunfire stopped, some soldiers came up to me and said it's safe to get up. And they then took me in their vehicle back round to where the jeeps were. And so at that point, I had no idea what had happened to all the other hostages since I made my escape run. And then I was called over to one of the military vehicles, and I saw lying in the back the other American on the trip, Margaret Thompson, who had been wounded in the thigh with a bullet. And she was lying in the back, a lot of blood. There were two Yemeni soldiers in the back with her. So I got into that vehicle and accompanied her to, well, it was about an hour's drive on dirt roads. She must have been in incredible pain during that, to get to the nearest medical facility, which was a clinic in a small village. And there was another woman who had been wounded, 3 bullet wounds, and had not died, and she was in another vehicle. And then all the other hostages were in the jeeps, and sort of we all ended up driven to this village where there was a clinic. It was only then that one of the other passengers said to me that Ruth and Peter had been shot, and she thought they were dead. We then, the 2 women who were wounded and the Australian woman and myself who accompanied them, spent about the next 3 to 4 hours in what was called an operations room or operating room of this clinic, while nurses and a person who seemed to be a doctor treated their wounds, did the best they could, put them on a saline drip. I mean, it was like a MASH unit. They were also bringing in wounded soldiers. There was blood everywhere. It was pretty amazing. And then at one point I went out to see where everybody else was, and I walked down the corridor, and that's when I saw the bodies of the 2 in our group who had been fatally shot, laid and wrapped in blankets on the floor of the clinic. They told us that they were arranging to get a helicopter in that would fly us out, and it was about 4:30 in the afternoon when we finally heard the helicopter arriving, and then they loaded us, the 2 bodies, the 2 wounded women, and Catherine and myself, into vehicles and drove us extremely fast to where the helicopter had landed outside the